Hello, and welcome back to Argyle's Future Work. My name is Eric Wallace with Argyle. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our panel moderator. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. To ask questions during the session, simply type into the Q&A chat and we'll address your questions at the end of the session. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Monique Jefferson, Chief Human Resources Officer at New York Public Radio. We're excited to have Monique and our panelists with us for a panel discussion called Engage, Train, Retain, Mastering Employee Experience to Thrive Amidst the Great Resignation. Welcome, Monique. Over to you.
Thank you, Eric. And welcome, everyone. Very excited to moderate today's panel. Before we jump in and get started, I'm going to take a moment to allow our panelists to introduce themselves. Carly, we'll start with you.
Awesome, thank you. So as Monique mentioned, my name is Carly Ackerman. I'm the Director of Customer Experience for VIP and Partnership Accounts at Eightfold AI. Eightfold is an AI-enabled talent intelligence platform, and it really is designed to support individuals and organizations in finding the right roles for the right people based on their skills, but also on their potential. So I started my career in public education as a special education teacher. I went on to lead an all-boys charter school in West Philadelphia before I made my transition into management consulting. So spent about 7 years focusing on workforce transformation at Deloitte. And I've been very interested in skills and skills-based talent management for a long time. So very excited for today's discussion.
Wonderful. And Charlene?
Thanks, Monique. So I'm Charlene Kathari. I'm with Schneider Electric. I lead the People in DEI organization within North America. Schneider Electric is the most sustainable company in the world, as it was recognized just this past year. And we work on products and solutions that essentially make the world greener.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both for joining us this afternoon and participating in the panel. So we'll jump right in. So for my first question, what is the #1 employee experience investment that you've seen companies make during this great reshuffle? And do you think it's effective?
I can go ahead and get us kicked off. So toward the end of my time at Deloitte, I was working very closely with organizations who wanted to become what we referred to as skills-based organizations. And what this meant was that they wanted to completely rewire their HR and talent processes. And the idea would be that the entire employee lifecycle, all the way from the hiring process through succession planning, would be driven by one single common data set, and that would be employees' skills. And I've really continued to see organizations make this investment. As you might imagine, it's a very big investment. It's very involved. You have to get the business bought in for one. This can't be an HR only initiative. You really have to make sure that your business leaders are bought in and want to be involved in the process. And you have to take a hard look at your HR tech stack. If the skills are going to be that red thread that really ties everything together, then you have to make sure your major systems are all speaking the same language, so to speak, and that there's just a single source of truth for what that skills data is. So in terms of being effective, I think we're still in the time will tell phase. I think we just need more time for the experimentation to happen. It's just the kind of work that requires lots of cycles to get it right. It requires starting in a small part of the business maybe, and then scaling from there once you've achieved some learning cycles and some real demonstrations of the return on investment. And it's going to require recalibrating. So, as you learn through the processes and through the experimentation, making sure that you're making those adjustments along the way. And I'm hoping that we will see the success of this in the coming years, but definitely still, I think, a work in progress.
And maybe just to add to what Carly mentioned, I would say the other areas where I see investments being made, definitely in the mental health area. So, through the pandemic, it's taken definitely a toll on many of our employees working from home. There was a Harvard Business Review article recently mentioning how loneliness has increased People working, I think many individuals have not realized that working from home, day after day has led to a degree of loneliness. And that then in turn impacts your mental health, and mental health impacts your physical health. So, across the board, we've seen healthcare inflation increasing as well. So more and more companies are definitely focusing on the mental health space and introducing platforms that employees, even managers, can leverage in terms of providing coaching and guidance to some of their employees. The other space I'd say is more on the technology front in terms of the collaboration technology. So, what we're leveraging today in terms of Zoom or Teams, you can see that the technology has improved greatly in terms of employees being able to connect and working remotely. So I think that's been another area where we've seen huge investment.
Thank you. And so what role does the employee experience have in hiring, and what are some innovative ways you see companies align the employee experience with hiring and retention?
Sure, so I can start with that. So I think, I was talking about some of the digital investments that companies have made, but what I would say is this is an area where we need to also focus on the non-digital components as well, to really drive that employee experience during hiring. So what I mean by that is, first of all, having a buddy. So especially with more and more people coming into the organizations and you're working remotely, you need to be engaged with other employees in the organization. You need to have a buddy that can really tell you about the culture, the ins and outs of the organization. So I think that's a critical element to have. So maybe not so innovative, but I would say just something foundational. Another foundational element I would mention is some of the face-to-face interactions. So again, working in a remote way, you sometimes get away from that face-to-face interaction. And I would say it takes away from the onboarding. You really need to get to know some of the people, your manager and so forth. So if your manager is at a different location, I think it's important that you do connect face-to-face with your manager or some of your team members to really be able to connect with them, to really then help with that overall onboarding. So, I think it's going back to some of the basics that sometimes you forget about when you're working in the environment you are today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I was going to say back to basics. So simple things like a buddy. I would also add what we call company swag. So, I think managers don't realize, or they underestimate two things. I find something small can make a world of difference, particularly if you are onboarding remotely or in a hybrid environment. Making sure that the equipment, the laptop, the technology is sent to the employee a couple of days in advance of when their official start date is, that they get a personal call from whoever your technologist is that helps to walk them through, other than turning it on, how do you set up, how do you access your systems? I think it really just makes a world of difference in the experience from a hiring standpoint. And then the second piece of that is swag. So nothing makes an employee feel really good, whether you're in the office or not, is when you get to your desk or when it's over, sent to your home, some company swag, an umbrella, a mug, a t-shirt, a sweatshirt. But it really, again, it speaks to the experience as part of hiring, and it allows the employee to connect. So.
Yeah, and I take this question super literally in terms of the hiring piece of the question. So even before we get to onboarding, right, there's a candidate experience that really sets the stage for potential employees. That's their first impression of the organization. And assuming you have a fabulous employee value prop, you're offering the swag, you have a great organization with great values that are easy to understand and that the market has definitely absorbed, you're going to have candidates who are actively seeking opportunities. But if their experience with the tools that they're using through the hiring process, with the recruiters, with their interviewers, if any of that is bad, that's going to influence their decision as to whether or not they even want to work with you at some point. So you can definitely lose out on solid talent if that candidate experience is negative. And I think in terms of retention, again, this is the point in the relationship where you're laying the groundwork in terms of the commitments that you are saying that you've made to your employees through their career experience. So I think it's important through the candidacy process and the hiring process to really walk the talk as it relates to those commitments that you've made. Show the candidates the policies and some of the practices that you've put into place around fostering career growth, learning and development, right? Make sure that folks understand what the experience is going to look and feel like. What is that onboarding experience going to be? How long am I considered new before I'm expected to really deliver value? I think it's really just a matter of building trust. And I've been reading a lot of the research coming out of the Josh Bersin company, specifically Kathy Andaris. She leads their employee experience research. And I think building that foundation of trust before somebody even signs on the dotted line is going to be crucial, not only for hiring top talent, but holding on to top talent.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things you mentioned is the hiring and also the retention piece. But one of the things that we've recently done here at New York Public Radio is that we've explored coaching, and we understand the power of coaching. Traditionally, coaching has tended to be reserved for the more senior levels or higher levels within the organization. It's usually either done when, for high potential purposes, or if you're trying to develop talent to another role. But what we've realized over the past year is that coaching, we want to scale coaching and make coaching available to everyone, right? And we've been able to leverage that and use that as a competitive advantage, not only in the hiring process with our candidates to say, you come here and you will have access to coaching, and it's unlimited. There's no cap on a number of hours. It's not like they will meet your needs. It could be video, it could be in person, it could be a call. So it's very flexible and meets people where they're at. And so we're able to leverage that as part of the hiring process to attract candidates, but then also from a retention standpoint to keep our candidates here as well. The fact that this is a tool and a resource that they can tap into that's scalable. So now we've talked about all these great things, tools, some innovative, some just basic with regards to the employee experience. So now let's talk about measurement. So how have you seen companies measure the success of the employee experience? And do you think it's working? And do you have any suggestions around how you think that success can be measured better?
Yeah, Carly, do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
Sure, I'm happy to take this one first. Yeah. I think measurement is always kind of tricky. I think in this case, retention rates and employee satisfaction scores are probably going to be the most common. But I've also seen organizations starting to encourage their employees to do things like proactively adding reviews to sites like Glassdoor, right? Places where candidates are going to go look about what their potential experience could be, or providing a little bit of input into what is a day in the life look like at this organization. I think this is where organizations can potentially get into trouble. I think it's tricky. Obviously these reviews are going to be subjective, but they're also totally visible to your customers. So this can end up helping from a value prop perspective. It can also harm. So, not only do I think that it's important to encourage this kind of transparency, but if you're going to do that as a leader, you really need to make sure that you're committed to the time that's required to review, reflect on some of that feedback, and at the end of the day, make some proactive changes that are needed to make sure that the tactic is useful to you. So I do think, the basics of retention rate and employee satisfaction are probably what we're going to see being used for some time. I just think we still haven't gotten to a place where we can scrape for this type of data. But I'd be interested, Shalene, if you've seen anything that's more innovative.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree completely, Carly, with the comments you mentioned. And I think on top of employee satisfaction or engagement, I think the other gauge that we've started talking more about, and I've seen other companies talk about as well, and it connects to the point around mental health, is just well-being in general. So I think there's a huge focus on the wellness of our employees, how they're doing. And I think that is going to be something that more and more organizations focus on going forward. So it's not just how engaged are they, but what is the, the general well-being of our employee base. And an interesting thing that's slightly connected that I saw in an article that I was reading from Microsoft is they've moved away from engagement, and the term that they used was thriving. How are our employees thriving? And it focuses on some of the pieces, Carly, that you mentioned, from a retention perspective in terms of looking at development, and it encompasses wellness and engagement. So it's a little bit more holistic. I really liked this term that they're using and how they're measuring the success of the employee experience within their organization. And I think that may be something that may catch on in other organizations as well. So I feel like that's something that is a little bit more innovative in leading. The other piece, and this goes to one of the first questions that's in the chat as well, around in terms of the investment that employees can make, if there's anything tangible. I think the other thing that organizations need to start measuring is how inclusive their culture is, specifically with how most organizations are operating today, right? So with remote ways of working or hybrid ways of working, you don't have that same culture that you may once have had. And it's becoming more and more challenging for managers managing people across many different locations, managing employees that are of different generations, different genders, and so forth, compared to what they may have been used to managing 10, 15 years ago. So I think the other big area of focus, one is to really provide the training to managers on how they could lead and create a more inclusive culture. But that in itself is a measurement I think that many organizations will need to focus on, is if they do have this inclusive culture.
Absolutely. I think that there's two pieces to that, because even before the pandemic, I think that was a focus on how are you an inclusive leader, right? Now, I think it's very complicated for people managers right now, because not only is it we want you to be an inclusive leader, but now it's also, oh, and by the way, we want you to be able to lead virtual or remote teams. So, in a hybrid environment. So it's hard being a manager right now. It's definitely not easy. From a measurement.
Do you mind if I ask a question on the well-being piece?
Sure.
So I'm going a little off script here, but I'd be interested, Shalene, just hearing some of your input on well-being and wellness. What I've been hearing a lot in conversations with folks is that everybody has a different approach to well-being and wellness, right? Some people need to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and put in a 90-minute workout. Some people need to be able to get up in the middle of the day and go for a walk to take a call. Some people need to Netflix every evening, right? Like it just looks different. So in terms of the measurement piece, I'd just be interested in, we don't have to go down this rabbit hole, but if you have it top of mind, how we're measuring wellness in an apples to apples way, just knowing that it looks very different for different populations and different people.
It's a very good question, Carly, that you're asking. I don't know that I or my organization have everything figured out by any means. I think we're all sort of learning together. But I think you bring up a very interesting point. I think one is in terms of the experience that you have is going to be very unique in terms of, what well-being is to you is going to be something very different for another individual. So in terms of the delivery or the application of well-being, it's very unique to the individual. I think what can be standardized to a degree is potentially some of the questions that you ask in terms of measuring well-being. And, but to your point, I think there needs to not be just one question or one way of measuring well-being. I think there needs to be different facets in terms of how you measure well-being, right? So some of it is through the surveys. Some of it is going to be through just the output that you achieve, looking at also retention rates and other measures, right? Indirectly, I think you're going to be able to look at well-being. What I'd say is also is your health, your medical claims, getting a breakdown. And we've started asking for a breakdown with our vendor that we work with our third party, to really understand what are the type of medical claims that we're experiencing within the organization as well. So I think there's multiple dimensions to look at to measure the overall wellness of our employees within the organization.
Thank you for indulging me.
Yeah.
I actually, just as a follow-up to Charlene's answer, I have seen organizations leverage LOAs as almost as a way to be proactive and to get ahead of any potential spikes, stress, burnout that they see happening within the workforce. So if they see maybe within a particular department, there's been a spike in the number of leaves of absences or types of leaves. Now, obviously, this is information that the benefits team, will kind of handle, and they can look for those trends and themes, but you can also leverage that data as a way to measure and then respond to that by putting different programs and processes in place in terms of well-being, from a LOA, spike, how many people are taking leaves, what type of leaves are they taking, et cetera. Another form of measurement that I've seen as well through surveys is onboarding surveys. So I've also seen organizations where at the 1 week, 30-day, 60-day, and 90-day mark, they will push out a survey, very short, like 5 to 10 questions, to the person that was, recently hired. And they're really specific about the types of questions that they're asking. So the questions that they'll ask you at the 1 week survey is, did you attend your orientation? Did your manager meet with you the first day? Did they take you out to lunch? Did you enroll for benefits, that kind of thing? Whereas when you maybe get into the 30-day survey, they're asking questions like, were you given an onboarding plan? Did they sit down with you and give you the lay of the land, your org charts? Did you have meetings set up with key stakeholders within the first couple of weeks, already on your schedule when you joined? So those are the types of, through those surveys and asking those very specific questions, that's how we're measuring it, but then also being able to go back and enhance and improve each step of the process along the way. So now let's just shift and pivot for a moment. With most companies employing some type of hybrid workforce, what are some ways to ensure that engagement is successful for both the in-office employees as well as the remote employees?
You want to start with that one?
Sure. So I think it's a very interesting question, and one of the challenges that we're definitely facing as an organization, and we've been discussing what are the things that we can do. One of the things that we've talked about is something simple as within each, small group, large groups, doing more virtual coffee chats that sort of equalize the platform for those that are coming into the office, those that are working remotely, making sure everybody is equally engaged. That being one thing. Second is creating some opportunities for those that are working remote to come in every now and then into the office. So creating meaningful events that they can, where they can come in. One of the things that we've talked about again is that it's important to have sometimes those face-to-face connections. We're not saying that you need to come in every day, or, but maybe it's once a week. Maybe in some cases it's once a month, depending on, how far the office is, but at least creating some live connection with the individuals that you're working with or that are part of your company. It's just healthy, and we as people need that human interaction. So, being virtual, being digital doesn't mean you just completely disconnect and have just your interactions in a virtual way. And at least that's my view, that you do need those human interactions. And so I think that will keep the long-term success. And that goes back to the point of, loneliness and some other challenges like that growing, where you can overcome those challenges if you do have people coming together.
I also think it requires managers and leaders to be a bit more intentional around how they operate. And so in addition to everything that Charlene just said, it's also, when you have a team meeting, if that's not going to be the time that you encourage your remote workers to come in one day a week or whatever your standing team meeting is, making sure that you're setting up the meeting in a hybrid way so that both the people at home as well as the people in the room can see the same thing, hear the same thing, have the same type of hybrid experience. So really rethinking around how you operate and doing that through a hybrid lens. So and being flexible and saying, okay, this is something like kind of fun and quirky, but it means a lot. And it was a tradition, if you will, here at my organization. So Halloween time is a big deal here, is a big thing. The employees get really excited, they would dress up. And so last year for Halloween, we did a hybrid Halloween party. I was not sure how we were going to pull this off. It wasn't perfect, but the people who were remote really appreciated it. And what we did was, while we had a little costume contest in the office, we also had a costume contest for the people who showed up on screen for the best costume as well. And then the awards and prizes, if you got it when you were remote, we shipped it to you, right? So trying to, make sure that what you're doing is hybrid, but then also rethinking your day-to-day operations and doing that through a hybrid lens. I've also, one of the creative things that our managers here has done is, instead of asking the remote people to, come in for a training or a formal meeting or at a specific time, we actually brought the in-office people to them. And so in this particular department, the majority of people lived in like a particular area within one of the boroughs, or like over 70% of the people in the department lived in Jersey, in this particular county in Jersey. And so what the manager said was, okay, we're going to do a half day in Jersey at, this place or at the park. And it was nice out. And to bring everybody together, we'll have our meeting and then we'll do maybe a volunteer activity, but it was bringing the in-office people to the neighborhood of where the remote people were, which I thought was very creative and different. So.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, sorry, I was just going to mention one point quickly, based on what Monique mentioned, is that, meeting with your colleagues or your boss or manager, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the office. It could be offsite, to exactly what you mentioned, Monique, in a park or wherever, having lunches on a regular basis, somewhere offsite where you're all coming from your respective homes, but it's just that connection with people that is important. So I'll hand it off to you, Carly. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I have a totally different, I won't say perspective, but I guess personal experience in that I'm working for an organization that is 99% remote. We have an HQ, and there's a small population of folks who go into the office regularly. But it's certainly not the norm for us to be co-locating regularly. I mentioned earlier that I'm at a workshop right now, which is such a thrill to be in person with some colleagues. But I think what makes it work for us, and I would imagine also in your context, which is a little bit different, is transparency around decision making. And I think it all goes back to trust as well. If you're going to, and I know we came out of COVID we came through COVID with some new policies and practices. And I think the organizations that have been the most successful with their return to office strategies are the ones that have just been super clear on their decision-making process. And I have one story to tell, one example. I was working with an organization, let's say gas station convenience store chain, to give you a sense of, the type of population they were working with, employees who were both back office workers, so to speak, who would typically show up to the same building every day. And then also their front line, the people who are working in each of the branches, each of the storefronts. Obviously, totally different hybrid experience for those two populations. And you could imagine that having a differentiated approach to HQ versus frontline could probably cause some drama and some issues. But because this organization was so clear on the strategy, and because they also said, we know we're going to make mistakes, and we are grateful for your patience, and please expect us to change this policy over time. Just that level setting of expectations, I think, made such a difference in terms of their RTO rollout. And it changed 6 times in the 6 months I was working with them. But because they set that expectation up front, I just think that was critical to their success. And we don't fully understand how COVID is going to continue to evolve. So, being able, at this point, I don't even think it's too late to say, this is our policy today. Bear with us over the next year as this evolves.
Absolutely. So now we're coming down to the tail end. So our last question is now, what's next? So what's next in the employee experience? Are there any new processes, tools, technology that you feel will help engage the next generation of candidates?
I'm happy to go first on this.
Carly, we'll start with you.
So maybe this isn't next so much as an area that I think we're just going to see some continued growth. It's talent marketplaces and internal mobility. The economy is just so wacky right now. We've got high inflation, we've got falling GDP, we've got high employment rates. These are things that don't usually go hand in hand. So organizations can't really rely on looking externally for talent forever. And I think many organizations are still reeling from mid-pandemic layoffs, right? A lot of organizations laid off huge populations of their workforce and then had to go back and bring them back on. So there's a real business incentive at this point to maybe flip the paradigm from always looking outside to starting to look internally and make the most of the talent you have. So, of course, organizations have a practice of nurturing their top performers, but making sure that you're paying close attention to the rest of the organization. Maybe the people who are not necessarily your high flyers and your top 1%, but the people who have real potential for growth. So I've been seeing a lot of organizations asking, how do I build an effective talent marketplace? How do I make sure that my employees have line of sight into job opportunities, projects? You mentioned before, Monique, mentoring and coaching, right? How do we connect people based upon their interests, their potential, and their background and experience to make sure that you're really making the most of the people that you have and taking advantage of the talent that's already within your network. So I don't think that that's next. I think folks have already started to head in that direction, but I'm anticipating an increase in organizations making those types of investments.
Yeah, and I'll just build off of what Carly is mentioning here, because we launched an open talent market platform within Schneider a few years back. And to really touch on exactly what Carly is mentioning, we need to look at how do we maximize and optimize the talent that we have within the organization. And it's working well, but I think it goes back to what Carly was talking about at the start of this call with the focus on skills, right? So really trying to understand the skills that our employees have and how we can keep the conversation on skills versus experience. And that's something that we're trying to make sure managers understand as well. Let's not just focus so much on the specific experiences that our candidates have had, but really the skill sets that they have that they can leverage for the various roles that we're looking to fill. What we're still trying to figure out with the technology that we have is really trying to understand some of the adjacent skills. That is something that we're still trying to figure out how we can really make sure that is highlighted. Sometimes employees are not as upfront in terms of highlighting those adjacent skills, but based on the skills that they do have, we know that there's certain skill adjacencies that they do have that we need to capture and make sure that's taken into consideration as well. So that's something that we're still trying to figure out, but I think that's where to the point that Carly talked about earlier in terms of this focus on skills and how we can get more data and analytics around it will really drive some of the decision-making in the future.
Wonderful, thank you. So at this point, I'm gonna, we can dive into the Q&A. So I'm gonna read off a couple of the questions that have come in from our listeners today. So the first question is, I'm just gonna read the question as it is here. Is there an organization that you think has a standout skills-based platform for the entire employee experience? Or do you think organizations are still trying to piece together different platforms to support the entire employee experience from recruitment, onboarding, training, succession planning, et cetera?
I can start and offer my perspective. You know, we, at least within our organization, we've been interviewing and a lot of different companies on this, you know, this topic of creating a skill-based platform and working with a lot of consultants as well. And what we found is we haven't found any organization that really has the end-to-end solution. They may have a part of it, but not really the full, you know, when you look at the whole employee life cycle, where you're able to really create an entire platform around, you know, around skills. So, you know, there's organizations that have skills taxonomy, but in terms of how you then pay for certain skills, we found organizations or third parties that can really assess how do you pay for digital skills, but not really the soft skills. So there's pieces that we see, and what we found is that in certain companies that have created a view of the whole ecosystem, it's maybe more advanced in English-speaking countries versus other countries where they're doing pilots in the US and UK and so forth, but they have not really evolved in some of the other European or Asian countries. So I do feel that this is an emerging area. There's pieces that you know, the decision we've taken is that we're going to have to take a piece from here and a piece from there, and we're still trying to piece everything together. And we know that it's going to evolve over time as organizations get develop more comprehensive solutions or improve the technology in the space.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that it depends upon the size and complexity of an organization too, how detailed and I guess complex the underlying systems are going to be that support an end-to-end skills-based talent management system. I think what we've seen, and I will speak from my experience as a consultant, because obviously I work for an organization that would support talent acquisition and talent management from a skills-based talent management perspective. But having worked with some of the organizations in my previous role, some of the big questions are, what's your source of truth? What's the backbone of your system and your tech stack? I'd mentioned earlier, you know, the heart of the problem here is getting all those systems to speak the same language. And if the language is going to be skills, I think, Shalene, you brought up a fabulous point. Just think about global organizations. How do you do that in 100 different languages? So it's an incredibly complex question. But I think organizations who are starting in pockets and experimenting are the ones who are seeing the quickest returns, because they're able to take all of that learning and scale and test in the right areas of their business and also in the right regions, depending upon where they are. So I think the short answer is there's never going to be a silver bullet. But I do think that there's been enough investment and research done on this topic where we're starting to see the benefits of weaving together a fabric of different platforms, so long as there is that red thread of a single source of truth.
So the next question has to deal with, I guess, new hire and onboarding. So do you think it's important to have shadowing for your new employee for their first week?
I'll I'll go ahead and get started on that one. I think it's important for the first year. I just think it's incredibly important for new employees, especially in a remote environment or even in a hybrid environment, to really start to understand the ways of working, the ways an organization does things. Even if you're making a lateral move from your previous organization to your current, there are going to be tangible differences in how that work is done. So I think having the opportunity of letting somebody sit in on a meeting, letting somebody join you in a workshop. They don't have to have a speaking role there. It needs to be no expectation of output or deliverable. Let them learn from that experience, because learning by doing is going to be your most effective approach to getting somebody quickly up to speed.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Carly. I think it's important regardless of level. You know, the type of shadowing that's done may differ based on the role. You know, it may be more hands-on if you're maybe in an entry-level type of role. But I would say even if you're in a leadership type of role, I think it's important for leaders, especially to the point that Carly made, in this remote environment, where you get a sense of what the culture is within the organization that you've joined. So it's not necessarily, you know, being an active participant on some of these calls, but just getting a sense of the dialogue that's taking place and what the organization is like. So I think kudos to the question that's being asked, because I think it's something that is really underrated, but something that could be of great value in many organizations.
Yeah. I would also just add is be very intentional and thoughtful around who is doing the shadowing, or, you know, how you're setting that up, because I often find the trap that many organizations and leaders get into is that you have people that perform very well, you know, very good at their job, particularly technically, but that does not mean that they're the best person to have to show someone else or allow someone else to show them, because sometimes it's so routine and it's so rote that they may not be willing to take the time to say, you know, take questions. Well, why did you do it that way? And, you know, be a little bit patient and help the person bring them along. So just make sure that you're identifying the right people if you are going to be doing the shadowing. We have time for one more question. So our last question, maybe two. We have 2 more questions left. The next question I'll take, it has to do with coaching. So it says, do you have packaged coaching platforms for each level of employees? So what we've done here at New York Public Radio is that we've just rolled out a coaching platform, and it is a single platform. It's opened up to everyone. Doesn't matter your level, doesn't matter what your length of service is. Everyone is able to take advantage of the coaching. So, you know, you go into the portal, you have a menu of options of what type of coaching or what you want the coaching conversation to be about, whether it's you have a performance meeting, a performance review meeting coming up, and you want to prep and you want to have your coach help you with that. It could be you want to talk to someone about you're having some anxiety or some concerns about returning to the office in person. You want to talk to a coach about that. It can be about anything. So there's some options and some menu topics to help guide the conversation and provide some additional details so that they can select the right coach. And then you also, if you have a preference, you can also indicate if you want a preference for a coach, if you want the coach to be BIPOC, if you are a working parent and you want the coach to be a parent, or if you're a single parent and you want to speak to someone about that, you can put demographic preferences, if you will, if that's what you want in your coach. So we just rolled it out. So far, the feedback has been great. And we really hope to see, we're going to be looking at engagement, looking to see how that is contributing to increasing our levels of employee engagement. So 1 more minute, I'll try to squeeze in the last question. We have worked hard on our employee experience model, but are still losing employees at an alarming rate. Any suggestions for gaining a better understanding of this turnover and whether it is related to the employee experience in 30 seconds?
What I would say is it would be good to really do an exit survey, not necessarily interviews, but an exit survey to understand why people are leaving. That will give you the answers that you're looking for in sort of an objective way.
Thank you. Carly, do you have anything to add or?
Couldn't agree more.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone. On that note, I will turn it over to Eric. Turn it back over to Eric.
Great. Thanks, Monique. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this excellent webinar. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event.